Okay, I think I'm gonna get started. So welcome everyone to the pediatric section here. You can all sit back and relax. And we got bubbles and stuffed animals at the end for everyone. No, I'm just kidding. So this is the pediatric section. I'm just curious, how many of you guys actually PAM versus just a couple? Okay. Hi. So good. We have a couple of PAM and then the rest is just EM. You guys are EM training. It's good. My name is Sam, and this is Blood, Sweat, and Jelly. Share experience from an unfunded pediatric ultrasound research network. And none of the speakers has any conflict of interest to disclose here. So here are the objectives of our talk. Number one, to describe the essential components of multi-institutional clinical and educational research. Number two, to recognize the challenges and downsides of unfunded network research. And number three, to apply the tips and advice from the panelists to augment their own network research studies. So my name is Sam Lam, and I work at the Children's Hospital in Colorado, where I am the Associate Ultrasound Director in a section of emergency medicine. I am a professor of clinical pediatrics in University of Colorado School of Medicine, and I'm a research co-chair of the P2 network. And we got to go through this a little bit if you don't know anything about a P2 network. So I'm going to just share my story, basically. This is my 10, 15 minutes. I'm just going to talk to you about my story. You can ask questions, do all that. So I call my story Building the Plane as And I'm going to start, basically skip my pediatric fellowship, and I'm going to start the year 2010. So the year is 2010. I had just finished my ultrasound fellowship. And pediatric emergency ultrasound on PEM focus was just starting at the time. There were probably like a handful of us in the whole country with that skill set. And I was an assistant professor. I was hungry to make my mark in the world, both in my career and for the field of PEM focus as well. And I decided to do research as my focus. There are there are quite a number of great PEM-focused educators at the time, and I was not one of them. That's why I wanted to do research. Fortunately, my fellowship director was very well connected, so he basically connected me with the people he know. They're very good at research and very good at ultrasound as well. And I also took the AMBERS course, ASAP AMBERS course, which is the Emergency Medicine Basic Research Skills course, which gave me a little bit of methodology background and some statistical background as well. So that got me started doing some small projects, and I was seeing some progress in my so-called research career at that time. Then my window of opportunity came, 2013. That's when the ASAP, Pediatric Emergency Medicine section, put out a call for a research seed grant. It wasn't a big grant at the time, but I thought a great idea, and I was going to go for it. So here's my idea. Way back, I'm going to take you a little bit back before 2010. So before I started ultrasound fellowship, I did an ultrasound study. And we did a study on the utility of focus in pediatric skin and soft tissue infection. That is cellulitis and abscess. Try to distinguish the two. And I worked with this guy named Adam Simmons out of Bergmann. And he was a great collaborator. We worked together. It wasn't a big study. We recruited like maybe 50 kids at the time, but it was early and it was cutting edge at the time, and we had some success proving ultrasound was helpful. So we actually got that published. My idea was actually take that study with Adam and kind of make it a little bit bigger. First of all, improve on the methodology, make it a better study, and then we can make it a little bit bigger so we can recruit kids from multiple institutions all over the country, so that we can make our results a little bit more generalizable to what we're looking at. So that was my research idea. The second thing I went on doing was basically defining methodologies. So methodologies is basically somebody helps you to write these study methods. And I asked around, and I was just looking for somebody to help me out. And I was introduced to a friend of a friend. His name is Bergmann. And he was working in Philadelphia at that time. And over the next 2 months, Cash and I went back and forth. There's no Zoom, so just basically email and phone at that time, and we kind of just hash out protocol. We went back and forth, fine-tuning, perfecting our protocol until we get to the point that we sort of like what we did, settled on a prospective observational study on kids that had ultrasound done as part of the management of CNS infection, and comparing to the kids that did not have ultrasound done as part of the management of CNS infection. So basically, we had a comparison, and we look at different outcomes, and we want to see if that the outcome was any different for kids that did have ultrasound, did not have ultrasound. So we did that. And then the next thing was to find out content experts. Well, that was actually fairly easy. As we talked about before, the field pen focus was fairly small at the time. There were only a handful of people in the country. So I just sort of called my friends and colleagues, my buddies, including Dr. Adamson, and they would be my content experts as well as my collaborator. So we got all these components, put together a grant submission, and by stroke of luck, we actually got the grant. I know this is sort of like an unfunded, we talk about unfunded research, but this is a fairly small grant. The ASAP research seed grant is only $5,000. So it's a very small grant, and all of that actually went into like the research assistant salary. So none of the investigator get any pay, none of the institution got any money, and most importantly, the network itself did not get funded at all. So I think it still counts. It's an unfunded network study. And so that was done. The next thing you know, you got to get the research done, right? That's when I realized multi-institutional research involved a lot of paperwork. So what happens is for every institution you contact, the IRB would contact you, asking you CV, asking you to go through the training, asking you questions about the protocol, and most importantly, you have to fill all those data share agreement and data use agreement, a lot of between all those institutions. And that's when the lawyers get involved. And you know when the lawyers get involved. It's kind of taking a lot of time. So it's a lot of paperwork to go through. And fortunately, at my department, we had a research nurse in there that took care of all the paperwork. And most importantly, God bless her, she does not ask for any additional salary support, which I could not afford at the time. So we got a regulation person, and that was actually part of the team. We got a research assistant because they couldn't pay for it. So that was good. We got the team going here. So then another good thing happened in 2014. So in 2014, another great thing happened was the formation of the P2 network. P2, or Pen Focus, it's basically a consortium at the time of Pen Focus experts and kind of advocates or champions, mostly from North America at the time, US and Canada. But there are a few people from the world as well. Like Juan is actually from Israel, he's just visiting Toronto. And then there's a guy from Egypt who's working in Montreal at the time. So people with like international connection. And at that time, we've grown quite a bit. So instead of a handful of people, we get a couple of dozen people, maybe like 2 or 3 dozen people that have the skill set of Pen Focus. And there was so much enthusiasm and momentum at the time that we decided to gather in Toronto for a first meeting to discuss various things, mostly just issues related to focus research, education, and administrative issues. So at the end of this discussion, we decided to form the P2 network, and that was in 2014 in Toronto. And so that gave me extra momentum. So you get all these like young and enthusiastic ultrasound people that really want to make the market work. It's like assistant professor level. So they gave me momentum to recruit all these co-investigators. I was able to recruit a couple of investigators. That was the momentum I needed for my work to do network research, Pen Focus research. And the original plan was actually have Prakash, Dr. Mystery, to be our statistician. But again, something better happened. I don't know if it's better for the group or for myself, but I decided that I wanted more research training. So I went and applied and got into the research fellowship. And that what came with it was actually an enrollment into the Master Public Health program. So what I did was I used this project. Actually, before I went into this Master Public Health project, took about a couple of years. We finished enrollment after a couple of years. It wasn't a big project, but it did take us 2 years to finish the project. We ended up doing a 6-institution study with a little over 320 kids. So it wasn't big, but a lot of times just regulation, getting the site going and all that stuff. And And I had went through like close society before I actually went for a master's in public health. But I did use that as my thesis and my master's in public health. So what was good was that I had epidemiology faculty helping me out in my thesis. So they would help me with the data analysis, with the statistics, and then they would help me with the write-up as well. So with that, I got a manuscript put together, got published in 2018. I finished my research fellowship in 2017. So it was a year after my completion of fellowship, and we published this manuscript. And that was actually probably one of the first pen-focused network research published at that time. It's a multi-institutional. I mean, there are lots of pen-focused study published, but that was probably one of the first multi-institutional studies in the field at the time. So that was 2018. So fast forward a little bit to the present day, the P2 network, it's still growing. We're still meeting on an annual basis, actually in person if we could, except for COVID years. We just had a meeting, actually, the P2 meeting in DC, the PAS, actually last month, and we had over 120 people. So it's probably the biggest P2 meeting we've had so far. And we still get together, we still talk about research, we still talk about other things related to pen focus. And I've worked with these guys probably a good 8, 9 years now, and then we've put out a few projects. I was part of it, and now I'm the research co-chair, research committee co-chair at the PG network. We are still building. We're still building our research infrastructure. We still have lots of work to do, but I'm very proud of what we've done in the PG network. And on a personal note, as far as my career goes, I decided to change jobs in 2022. And partly because of what I did with the P2 network, I was able to be hired as a full professor. So as my career go, I sort of accomplished what I set out to do in 2022. And just to close the circle, the research director at Children's Hospital Colorado, Second University, is actually a past mystery, the guy that helped me write the protocol in the first place. I did not ask him for a job. That was, it was unintentional. I mean, I ended up in Children's Hospital Colorado. I knew he was there. I interviewed with him, but I didn't go up to him and say, "Do you have a job opening?" But it just worked out that way, that he was my research director. So we had this close circle there, and end up working with people that I work with. And Adam Sivitz is there, and you see his name actually in the next manuscript as well. So it's the same close circle of people, and that's just that's really the why and how and why we do what we do. So basically, to wrap up my story, here are the lessons I've learned, the pros and pitfalls of my story. Number one, believe in yourself. Motivation of the investigator, and most importantly, your co-investigator as well, because we are all hungry, looking for ways to grow the field. So motivation is probably the most important factor in doing research. Now, in any research actually, to be successful, you need to be motivated for your project to be successful. Number two, a multi-institutional research or multi-site research does not always equal multi-dollar grant. Right? People think if you do multi-institutional research, you get a big grant. Not always the case. Right? In our case, we were able to accomplish our goals with little to no external support. I got $5,000, I research assistant, and you have a little bit in structure, but you can accomplish your goal with little or no funding if you have your goal clear. And to be honest, sometimes it's faster, right? If you apply for a grant, you have to wait for the grant cycle to complete. And if you don't get a grant, you got to apply for another grant. That sort of delays your project as well. You're kind of building your project around a grant. We were able to just move fast and complete our project. So lesson learned number 3 was that we sort of got together, our study, our project got together, as saying goes, just like a ship, right? Things kind of fall together as you move along. But one thing that did not leave to chance was basically the methodology, right? You want to make sure your protocol is as perfect or as complete as thorough as possible, include your protocol up front. You want to make sure your protocol is good, it's waterproof, because that's going to save you lots of time. I'm not just talking about protocol revisions, which happens, right? You don't think of anything after go back and class, but also to save you from that nitpicky review number 2 that looks at your manuscript and kind of picks it apart, finds it favorable, and render your whole 2 years worthless by rejecting it. So it's a point to spend time on to work on that protocol. Lesson number 4, it is possible to get your academic, as far as academic career go, be able to move up that ladder. It's definitely possible to move up academic ladder with unfunded academic research. And and this, because this gives you the international exposure, right? International recognition that makes it important for you to get promoted. Number 5, which is the pitfall of this unfunded network research. It's just that, right? People investing their capital in terms of blood, sweat, and gel. This is a voluntary network. So your job as a principal investigator is to make sure people know what they're getting into, set the expectations really clear, and kind of make sure that they can come into what you ask them to do. But life happens, right? Things happen, life happens, people drop out, and that happens to you. Both sides just initially say yes, but then drop out. So you have to have a backup plan over that to go well. So I did recruit a couple more sites, and we did okay. So that's pretty much the story for my career so far. And we're gonna introduce our next speaker, Dr. Delia Gold, who works at Nationwide Children's Hospital, who is the director of emergency ultrasound and ultrasound simulation. She is an associate professor of clinical pediatrics at the Ohio State University College of Medicine.
Hi, guys. So, yeah, I have a different story than Sam because I was never going to do research. And I also wasn't going to do ultrasound, to be honest. So my academic journey started when I was in PEM fellowship at Nationwide Children's. And I was reading articles in Journal Club, and honestly, I'm not kidding, it was Sam's article. It was the 2010 skin and soft tissue article, which is, if you take care of kids, that's a huge thing we see. And I was incredibly frustrated that it was clear that you could do bedside ultrasound on kids who we always talk about radiation and all of this stuff, but that we aren't getting trained. And so I would like kvetch to my fellowship director and division chief, why are we not doing any ultrasound? And why am I not trained in it? Because I have a massive hospital, but we weren't doing it. So I not pushing drinking, but I feel like I have good luck at bars. I met my husband in a bar. I was given an opportunity at a bar for my career that I never planned on it. I had just finished my month at the adult facility doing my month. And gotten to know a lot of the ultrasound faculty, and I did have the luck of being tied to a very strong adult facility, and I know that you guys know this, but like for the peds people, tying yourself to them is awesome because they run it differently, right? They have resources and a way of doing things. They have access to patients. They just like walk in and say, hey, I'm gonna scan you. Whereas in the children's hospital, we're like, may I scan you, blah, 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 because the mom's right there. You just get a different exposure. And I saw that and I was like, well, we could translate this to a kid's hospital. And I was at a resident's birthday party, and the ultrasound director offered kind of over drinks to let me be the first PEM Focus Fellow at the institution. And I was like super jazzed and, ran and told my division chief, and I'd always wanted to stay. This is something you can do even if you leave. You just kind of have the pre-talk with wherever you're going that this is kind of what you want to do with your life. And I said, I'm kind of thinking about doing this. And she actually said, honestly, we lose fellows every year because we don't offer training. And it's, even if you don't want to do it, it kind of seems like it's going to become like everyone should just be at least facile. And if we don't offer it at all, that's a problem. So I was lucky. I mean, you'll see in all of our stories, there's some luck in everything, but you have to kind of push it. When you see the door, you got to walk through it. And so I said, well, great. Yeah, I could do that. Sure. Why not? And so she said, yeah, why don't you come on as an attendee, but we'll send you over there to do your training. And then you have to start a program at the main hospital for the children's, the PEM fellows. And so now I'm done as a fellow. I'm kind of going back and forth between the two institutions. I've started the program. I'm like learning so much from my adult colleagues about what a POCUS program entails, how to train people. But the reality is like, there has to be value, okay? So Sam talked about like getting a research, fellowship, which I love him for it, and it helps when I talk to him when we do studies, but like, that's not me. And, but I know that I have to have value and beyond the education. So if any of you are med ed experts, like I'm a med ed person, I know it's so important, but like the suits need to see that and your boss needs to see that. And you have to figure out what is the language that speaks to them. So at my institution, billing for POCUS was not a thing. They don't care about the money for billing. What they did care about is that fellows are getting trained and we can retain people, but that they also wanted publications. That is what they wanted. So once I knew that was what they wanted, I was like, okay, I guess I gotta do that. Because I gotta show them I'm like my worth, my academic worth. Problem with doing that is that now I'm a one-woman show. I'm running the program, I'm like training all the fellows, I don't have research experience in like clinical, there's nobody who does ultrasound but me. You can't, Sam is, he dreamed bigger than I did. I was like, I'm not doing a clinical study when like no one even knows how to turn the machine on. Like I just won't do that. So what can I do? Well, I was left with trying to like turn what I was actively doing every day into research. And that is when my journey to med ed started. And a lot of people who do med ed, that's why. There's some people who just have been like kind of academic their whole life. They maybe were gonna be a teacher, their parents are professors. But there's other people where they're like, I'm spending all my time trying to teach something and it stinks. Like there's nothing to teach, no one's telling me what to do, I'm irritated. I function a little bit more driven by my irritation. So I was like, well, I need to learn how to do this because this is important for me right now. So for med ed, just really simply, there's essential components from the doctor side. So I'm assuming no one in here is a MD, like a master's of education plus a MD. If you are, I apologize. Feel free to raise your hand and interrupt me. I am not one of those. I was just a clinical physician who wanted to know how to do it. And the good research question is key. But it's got to be a med ed research question. So like what you as a clinical physician are interested in does not translate to med ed. It used to 20 years ago, and that's how all your like supervisors have just crushed it and are all professors in 10 years because they wrote the first like SIM paper. Don't work anymore. Like I'm too young for that and I got nailed because of it and it worked, but like you need to know that your question holds water from a med ed standpoint, not just I'm interested in how people can't learn how to do a chest tube properly, so let's do a sim on it and do a pre and post survey. You got to like kind of tighten it up. Hence the basic knowledge in education or research, knowing what's out there and knowing the kind of roots of how you design a med ed project. And you need to know basically what it is, but you don't necessarily need to be an expert. That's why you go for a team approach. I know everyone does a team approach, but I would argue that if you're doing bench research, you don't just show up with like rando stats people who are like first year grad students and like you banging out stata, right? Like that's not how you do it. Med ed has gotten to the point that it can be highly technical. So when you do that, you need to have more than just you. Like you can be the content expert who knows the material as the physician, but then you need to have like people who are just general educators, medical education specialists, even education and social science specialists, which you can pick up either at like your institution or your local, like your university that you're tied to, because they have like PhDs in medical education who do all the theory and they need to have a project to work on. Methodologists, because it's very different than clinical research, and like measurement specialists, because that's the thing, everyone's like, oh, I'll just do a survey. Have a survey person look at your survey. Like you can't just like write, you can, but it helps if you have them just like see the pitfalls of like how it could be torn apart by a reviewer when you do your results and your methods. It doesn't need to be amazing, but I would definitely make sure someone who has experience in surveys and measurement like tools that they look at it. And so this is where I was. Like I was kind of building the program, but I felt like I needed to do something. So I started small. I realized that I had these amazing POCUS mentors, but I didn't have any PEM POCUS mentors because I said I did my training, as a lot of people did back then, at the adult facility. So I was watching what they were doing, but I didn't have the PEM counterpoint. And I couldn't imagine that I was alone in this like kind of lone ranger. I'm the only person who can do it and I need help. And so I kind of leaned into this network, like again, and I don't know what your guys' clinical interests are, but there's a network for everybody, right? So like sepsis is massive, but I'm sure there's people who like one part of sepsis. I was lucky in PEM POCUS, it was so small that it is kind of like you could just reach out to people because everyone was trying to help each other. And so I had read papers by Dr. Jennifer Marin, who, if you know her, she's like kind of a, I can't say the word, BA, but, and she's great. And I basically got her number from a person who had trained with her, and I cold called her and kind of explained my situation, that I was alone, didn't have any help, and needed to do something. And she was like, yeah, I'll help you. Like, I'll help you as like just someone you can check and go, is this how you should set up the program? Well, as we were talking about the program, I realized that there was, I could do a survey study, or I could do a study evaluating like how I was, like the things I was going through, like why it was so hard, what are the barriers, why are people having trouble with this? And I had to look back at like what other people had done and see, and I saw it hadn't been evaluated in a while. And so we went ahead and did this project where talking to like attending physicians and fellows about like where they're at with ultrasound, like do they feel confident? Why are they not confident? Why don't they use it? Because this kind of material, for me, the med ed stuff I write is to try to use it to slide across the table to people who are kind of pushing back on what you want to do at your institution, because that's what I experienced. I had so much pushback that I was like, no, I need the paper to slide across and be like, you need to do this. Like, you need to let me buy an ultrasound machine to teach my fellows. So for me, that was a key thing. Always get something with teeth, like that people will care about. Maybe not even what I'm interested in, but what people will say, yup, okay, got it. Because that's how my institution talks and works through problems. So I did this paper, and then I could, I got to prove to my hospital also using this paper that POCUS is a viable academic path. Because back then they were like, what are you talking about? Are you a radiologist? And I'm like, no, I am an ER doctor who does ultrasound. So as nothing is perfect, I obviously could have done that paper better. As I'm like going on and on about the med ed expert, guess who didn't have one? Me. I listened to my senior author, who was awesome at med ed but wasn't formally trained. And the year that I applied, that paper, if you could see, was accepted to AEM Education and Training. That was the first year that breakdown, that journal started. And so they probably took a little pity on me because they had upped the game, and I had an amazing reviewer who very politely, editor, like helped me realize that I had some shortcomings. And so in order to address them, I got a med ed specialist who is from the adult hospital, who also works with the medical school a lot. And luckily I had enough that I had done on my own that we could kind of repackage it. I didn't have to do any other work. It was just like, you're not using the words properly. You're not using the word like curriculum properly and tool. Like, you are not qualified to call that a tool. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know. I thought it was just like a survey and I can call it a tool. No, not in med ed. There's like certain definitions. So I got help from him, who is now one of my mentors. I also, as much as I was excited about, because I had a measuring tool in my paper, in my mind, the gold standard, because you saw my last name's Gold. So I was like, ooh, I have the gold standard. You can't just make something a standard. You have to have validity evidence. I had done enough. I could have done it better. It still passed, but like lots of tension, lots of lost sleep about worrying about it. So try to do it. I was like, I got to do this better next time. So I did do it again, because as Sam said, when you start that one project, it'll build to something else. And this time I went bigger. And I saw like the gaps that there were, and I said, you know what, I want to teach stuff to my fellows, but there's nothing published that actually tells you what you should teach the PEM-POCUS fellow. There's a list of applications, but there's not anything about how you teach it to them. So I wanted to design a curriculum that like anyone could use to start their programs. I used the P2 network actually a lot for this, because I said, hey, if I bring this to the conference and I present it and people are into it, I could ask them to be a collaborator. So this paper had the names you see were the steering group, but there was 29 people total. And there was all experts from adult POCUS, PEM-POCUS, fellowship directors, division chiefs, because everyone's a stakeholder, at least in med ed, for trying to design a curriculum that you'll give to fellows. So I didn't just stick with the people I knew. We expanded it and had them go through this project. And there was definite growth. It was like, the other one had been regional. This was now an international study, a larger team with much more specialization. I did a lot more front-end work to prevent the back-end work, but it was definitely much harder by like a lot. It was brutal. But that's okay, because it was a big project. I learned a ton, and it definitely kind of, I hate to be like really kind of, I don't want to say cynical about it, but like when you say you're doing something like this, you get some time from your bosses, right? Like I got lots of abstracts. I got like people who wanted me to talk about it. And every time when you're trying to like build your career and make sure that you are like hitting your marks, it's just easier when you have something to give them that they can put their teeth into again. It's a curriculum, and there's no curriculum that's been designed. And in 2020 for PEM, the ACGME decided that POCUS is a core competency. And my paper was published in 2021. So that helped a lot, right? Because I'm like, oh, by the way, they just said this, and here you go. Slide it on over. I love sliding papers over. You guys don't know me, but I try to get Prince in every single talk I give, RIP, love the guy. Grew up singing Purple Rain in my bedroom with my brother. Hope you like Prince. If you don't, I swear he's a good musician. My pearls. It is a team sport, especially in med ed. Most of you who are in the room, I assume, are clinicians. You are not supposed to know what a master's of med ed or a PhD in medical education knows. Use them, use the university, use anyone that you can. The topic with teeth, particularly when I was at a high stakes environment trying to justify my existence, I wasn't gonna mess around with things that didn't speak to the bosses. I know that's a little sell out sounding, but I tried to do both, something I cared about, but that also spoke to them. And anytime you could do a 2-for-1, it's always great. And so I was literally doing the work and then just turning it into a paper at the same time. For med ed, the pitfalls are little C curriculum versus big C. So I had a lot of trouble with little C versus big C. I would use the word, hey, yeah, my curriculum. And they're like, well, is there this, that, and this? And I'm like, oh, right, that's what to you guys a curriculum is. Shoot. So just know, like, I don't know if anyone's into med ed, but just make sure you know the differences of assessment tool, measurement, like it's just different. Biting off more than you can chew. I did that on the first one, didn't have a med ed person and didn't have someone review my surveys. And then also just always an unfocused topic or an unanswerable question. Have some people look into your ideas and make sure it is something that can be done by someone who knows a little bit more. You might be the content expert, but you don't want to be stuck with something that you can't finish. So I'm going to introduce my second favorite Minnesotan third. My brother lives in Minnesota. So Prince, my brother, Kelly Bergmann. He works at Children's of Minnesota. He's the director of research in the Department of Pediatric Emergency Medicine and an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Minnesota. Go Gophers.
Well, thanks for being here, first of all. I wasn't sure how many people were going to show up, so this is nice that there are people here. So I think there are a lot of themes that have kind of like emerged from hearing Sam and Delia, and some of that is like there's some luck involved, but I wouldn't say that, I think you guys said like there was a stroke of luck or there was this, but I think it was grit and determination and dedication, and I think a lot of it is that. You need to be kind of committed to something and go all in on it, You need to show other people that you're excited about it, and that gets your research collaborators excited, and that just kind of snowballs. So some of my experiences were really similar. I got involved as a junior faculty with the P2 network, looking for a way to kind of start my career and kind of find my niche. And that led to conversations with people in the network, with Adam Sivitz, who Sam mentioned, who was one of my mentors on this project, and just kind of what do you think the gaps in our field are and what can we do about it? And that led to this topic about using POCUS for intussusception and how can we make that better. And this was probably like a 4-year endeavor. But I think a lot of the leaning on some network, for me it was P2 or a special interest group or whatever. You can leverage that to get a foot in the door, meet other people, and from there kind of some projects can really easily snowball. So I think just some things that were important for me and that I think you should know if you're going to get involved with a multi-institutional project. Having gone through that a lot, I think you need to be really clear. Well, first of all, you need to show people that you're running the ship, and you need to convey that and have people kind of understand that. You have to have clear expectations, and I think the biggest thing that people want to know about is authorship. They want to know, if I'm going to put in all this effort for this person who I've loosely met at some conference or on some Zoom call, what am I going to get out of it at the end of the day? You know, so you need to be aware of that. And that needs to be really clear, you know, depending on how many people you're collaborating with. If it's like 3 institutions, well, maybe it's okay to have 2 people from each institution on the author byline. For me, collaborating with like 15 or 20 institutions on this project, there are limits to how many authors can be on a byline. So, sorry, 1 person from each institution, and that's it, you know? And then people will drop out or say they can't do it, but then you get the group of people who are committed to it. You have to be clear about what people's roles are, what they're going to do, and what the timeline is for those deliverables. So you have to clearly say, okay, at your site, you know, you need to enroll patients. If you're doing a prospective study, you need to be able to take the time on your busy shift to go in, consent the family, go over the HIPAA form, do whatever data collection tool you need. If you're trying to collect some data prospectively, you need to be cognizant to kind of try to limit that because of people's time on a shift. And you have to let them know what the expectation is for when you're planning to complete the study. And I would say, give people a timeline that you know is a little bit earlier than what you expect. So you want to get this timeline, you want to get the study done in 2 years, give people 18 months to do it and tell them that's your hard deadline. When really, realistically, you're working off of kind of a different guideline or a different timeline in your own mind. I think it's important to have a core group of people, like a group within a group. So for me, that was like 3 or 4 of us that would meet regularly for this project, and we'd have meetings every couple of weeks and design the protocol, go over that ad nauseum. I think there was 20 different revisions before we kind of settled on something. But then going on along the way, while the study was happening, it was a lot easier to troubleshoot things with a group of like 3 or 4 people than it was with like 30, you know, because then you're just getting way too many ideas and it becomes unproductive. So having a core group, I think, is important. But it's also important to pull everybody in at some reasonable time frame. For me, that was like quarterly, you know, so you get people on an all-site call, you go over the data, you present what each site has been doing, and it builds momentum. People get more excited about it for like a month or 2, and then that kind of slowly maybe wanes a little bit. People get busy, you know, and then you have another all-site call 3 months later, and it kind of builds on itself and keeps the momentum going. So it is really important to have the right resources. We're talking about like an unfunded research network. P2 itself as a network is unfunded. All the people that, like Sam's role as a co-chair, you know, for the research arm of that is voluntary, you know. So, but it is important to try to seek funding when you can and try to get, that will help you. If you don't have the resources readily available to you at your institution, that will help you get them. So for me, probably the most important people on this study was my research coordinator and my research assistants, because my coordinator, I could say, okay, their job is to make sure every site has their IRB in order, and that every year they're going through, each site has their every annual, you know, IRB renewal, that our data use agreements are in order so that we can appropriately share data across sites from a legal aspect. So having somebody to offload that work onto was really important. Having RAs for me go in, enroll patients, do the HIPAA form, made it really and have the parents fill out whatever data collection tool, made it easy to get people from my department who were POCUS trained to be able to do the study and agree to do that without necessarily being an author. Because then for them, all they had to do was go in and do a scan, and that's it. They didn't have to spend 20 minutes going over the HIPAA form with families. So I think when you can get that support, it's really helpful. Biostat support too, we talked about methodologists and having somebody who's not necessarily clinical go over things from a different perspective is only going to make your work stronger, and you should lean into that. If they're challenging you on some idea or some concept about how this is going to work with the data or how these questions are answered, you should find somebody that you can trust. For me, I have a PhD that I do all of my research with, and having that relationship just builds on itself. So if you can find somebody inside your hospital, your institution like that, that's going to pay dividends down the road. So seek funding, I already kind of mentioned that. For me, I got a small seed grant from an internal grant program. So know at your hospital if there are internal grant programs, where they are, how to get them, what organizations offer grants, SAEM, ASAP, various pediatric groups as well. So start to kind of explore those for small seed grants. Image sharing is important for ultrasound studies. You have to be able to de-identify images and do that in a compliant way. So for this study, we used something called Sono ClipShare. I'm not putting in a plug for them, but you can search these different applications online, and that was just really convenient for people to create a username, an account, and they can go and dump their de-identified ultrasound images into the kind of the bank that I created. So you can easily get those images. So pitfalls, I'll kind of speed up here. You can't please everyone. So as a young investigator, like speaking from my experience, you kind of want to like prove yourself or show your worth. And you have these people that you're working with who you think of as kind of like above you. And you feel like you want to put your best foot forward, but you can't please everybody. And you shouldn't feel like you need to. You know, you shouldn't feel bad about leaving sites out if you're unsure if they're going to not fulfill their end of the bargain. As a PI, your job is to not let things get away. You need to be on top of it, available by email every day, every other day, you know, with some reasonable amount of time, and you need to be guiding that ship. And you need to hold people accountable if they aren't following protocol, if there's questions about that, if you think they're not holding up their end of the bargain. So you need to be really clear about those kinds of things, even to the point where, like, you know, if it's a recurring issue, like, hey, we need to pause enrollment at your site, and here's what that means. You know, there's concerns about how that's going to affect the data for everybody, and, you know, if we can't get that together, we're just not going to be able to use data from your site and have you as a contributing author, you know, period, end of story. You know, you need to say that. Thankfully, I didn't have to do that, but, so thanks for being here. There's a QR code that I think has links to these manuscripts, is that right? So, and our emails. So if there's any questions, we'll just take those now. And I think it might be, you might get the most out of it if you have questions about like how this relates to your specific situation in your story. Yeah.
Like if there have been burning questions, I mean, just yell at it, or we can hand you a mic and just kind of ask the questions. It's important to get things going for you. It's not, I think when you do network research, what we do is not any less complicated, but just any questions at all?
I love how you talk about how a lot of your work builds on itself and kind of snowballs. How do you get that initial sales pitch of like hey, so I have an idea, I can't guarantee you any buy down, like we're gonna hope it gets published or all these things, but how do you get that initial group of people that really wants to take that leap with you and join you on whatever project it is you're gonna try and pursue?
Yeah, let me see, is this thing on? I think they asked us to use this microphone, I think it's recorded. Question was, if people couldn't hear it on the recording, like how do you get that initial buy-in from people? I think that can start in a couple different ways. At meetings like this, you can casually go up to somebody and kind of spin your idea. You know, if you're doing something a little bit more like by email, sometimes it's nice to see. I find it when I work with mentees, if they send me kind of a reasonably polished kind of like two-pager that has a brief background, specific aims, and an outline of how they want to accomplish this, that's really impressive. And it shows somebody that like, wow, they're committed to this, they know what they're doing. So I think that helps if you're just going to cold email somebody. And then also like P2 has a newsletter, and there's a research section, like a research classifieds or wanted, and there's always like, this is the study title, this is who may contribute, and some of them are even like looking for PIs. You know, we're trying to grow our network, so you can search that too.
I think most people are not motivated by money. You can get grants, it's prestige, right? It's prestige, it's just manuscripts, and if you can offer them that's probably one of the more important things, and knowing them on a personal level, which is what the P2 network is great for. Just knowing all these people, we see these people year after year. It's not just like a casual acquaintance. We know these people, work with these people. It's a small community. I think that's the great thing about P2 network. So you got to find people that are the same interests as you do and same level of training as you do, and it makes it so much easier.
I think the idea is key. Like, having a good idea can almost even be ahead of how well you present it, as long as it's a really good idea. Now, there's not every idea is good or timely, but I think that people, when I was younger, I underestimated, for example, the impact of me presenting that first paper at P2. Like, I did it to say, I'm like totally out of myself. I did it to say that I presented at a national conference, because I was young, and I needed to justify the plane ride, and I needed to make the argument of why I should go. Well, it went over pretty well. And then people were like, I'd like to help with that. And I swear I think that's true for everything. And when I was younger, I thought, no, it has to be like this amazing thing. No, this is actually how it gets done. It really does get started like running into someone at a bar or at a conference or, at the gym, whatever event you want to be at. So I would not downplay it, but I would say, like, politically, knowing who the people are and where they might be, like that P2, I didn't know anything about it, but I could tell by the names that I read in all the papers I was reading, those people were there. And so that's where I went and decided to present. And it just kind of happened from that. Yes, ma'am.
How do you allow institutions to join P2? So if you have new faculty that are not formally ultrasound trained, but in their fellowship have an unbelievably heavy ultrasound education, who now, and so I'm speaking about the young faculty that I'm mentoring just in education. So you have that person who is very much interested in research. It seems to me, since I know nothing about P2, how do they get involved? What is the rules?
Yeah, so specifically if you're interested, and obviously, like, we were trying to talk about what we know, but we know that not everyone cares about ultrasound necessarily at this room, but if they're specifically interested in that, they should reach out. I'm happy to talk to them. We are all happy to talk to them, but joining anyone can join P2. Anyone can join it, and I would go to the national meeting. The national meeting it's imagining what, like, any adult conference was 20 years ago, like in a time capsule. We're peds, so we're a little bit behind. But all the talks, like the talks that we were having about like a DFP or FDP, whatever, like a focused delineation of privileges for ultrasound for peds, I was at that talk at SCUF for adult ultrasound like 5-something years ago, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like deja vu. Like, peds is just behind, but like that is part of what makes peds easier, is that you can watch the adult people kind of tweak it a little bit for the little adults and then move forward. And I feel like that's true for like sepsis, like everything, because peds is just a little bit different. There's some things we're ahead at, but when it comes to like big research consortiums, things that are like procedural, because we don't want to hurt anybody, we tend to just be a little bit slower. And I would kind of embrace that.
And you don't need to be like an ultrasound expert or have like a huge clinical experience with ultrasound to join. You can just have an interest, that it's not a limitation.
Sorry, because that's like my passion. I love how ultrasound used to be, and now we're starting to have all these people who are really like highly decorated doing, 30 study, Kelly Bergmann, so impressive. But I still remember being that person who was completely alone. And I think that P2 does like focus on that, where we still have the people who are building a program in isolation and are just trying to get radiology to stop arguing about doing an ultrasound. That's actually what gets me going. I love a fight. So I'm like, oh, I know how to win that fight. You come to me and I will tell you. And if you want like fancy stuff, that's why these guys are here. But we embrace it all, so.
Any other questions? Are we gonna? Thank you. Yeah, thanks. And P2 is free. If you want.
Oh, it's totally free.
Yeah, it's totally free.
Coach the goats. To join, the conference is very, like, compared to adult conferences, it's like, not crazy, but